We turn now to a new shakeup at the White House. Caroline Leavitt is set to leave her role as press secretary at the end of the month. Let's bring in NBC's chief White House correspondent Garrett Haake now. Garrett, good morning to you. First of all, what is President Trump saying about her departure? I know she's been out on maternity leave.
Yeah, Craig, and it's hard to overstate what a critical player Caroline Leavitt has been in this White House, and not just for what folks see on camera. She's been a fixture in President Trump's inner circle since the campaign, and that was reflected in the president's statement announcing her departure. He called her, quote, one of my most trusted aides, and says she'll continue to advise him from the outside after she leaves at the end of this month. And for her part, Leavitt is calling the decision to go bittersweet. At 28, she is the youngest person to ever serve as White House press secretary and the first person to give birth while in that role. Her second child was born in May, and she only recently returned to the White House full time after taking a short leave. In her statement, Leavitt wrote that since she's been back, she felt in her heart that she couldn't be the best mom that she thinks her young children deserve while doing such a demanding job.
Hey friends, Adam here. So this is happening right now. Caroline Leavitt, the youngest press secretary in American history and one of Trump's fiercest defenders, is leaving the White House at the end of the month. The departure is a significant shakeup. The reality is being quickly buried by spin. Trump announced it himself. No leaks, no anonymous sources whispering to reporters in a parking garage, no carefully crafted statement passed through layers of staff. He just came out and said it directly. Leavitt is stepping down. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because the reason he gave wasn't about politics, wasn't about some hidden scandal, wasn't about her being forced out. He said she's leaving to spend more time with her two young children, her family.
And this was breaking just within the last half hour or so, Olivia. President Trump announcing that Caroline Leavitt will be departing her role as press secretary. What do we know?
Yeah, this is big news. She is the youngest woman, I should also add, to ever hold the role of press secretary. She started the Trump administration with him, this second Trump administration. She also worked in the first Trump administration, and she was a fixture on the campaign trail. She just welcomed her second child earlier in May. She was on maternity leave and then came back around mid-July, but she is now going to be departing. The president wrote on True Social, she will be leaving her role at the end of the month to spend more time with her beautiful children. Trump says he understands and respects the decision. He has also said that she will take on the role of an outside advisor to him. So still will be in his periphery, but no longer going to be representing the administration from the podium in the press briefing room. We will be watching to see who will be next in that role.
And yeah, I know. Every single time a political figure steps down, there are always people saying, sure, that's the real reason, right? There's always skepticism. There's always doubt. There's always a sense that there must be something more going on behind the scenes. But before we jump to conclusions, let's actually look at what we know and what we don't know. On one side, you've got outlets framing this as a heartwarming, totally normal story about a young mother choosing her kids over a brutal, all-consuming job. On the other side, you've got people speculating about internal conflict, about pressure behind the scenes, about whether she was actually pushed toward the door rather than walking through it willingly. And the truth, like it usually does in these situations, probably sits somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. So let's not just pick a side and run with it. Let's actually look at what we know, what makes sense, and what this really means going forward.
Well, this was a bit of a shock announcement out of the White House today. Caroline Leavitt had only returned from maternity leave less than a month ago after she gave birth to her daughter back in May. That was her second child. She already had a 2-year-old son, and she said that that was key to her decision to step down from this role at the end of the month. She has released a lengthy statement on social media saying that this was a bittersweet decision. In that statement, she said, "The truth is, since returning to the White House after the birth of my daughter, I felt in my heart that I cannot be the best mum to my 2 young children while devoting the constant time, energy and attention required of the White House press secretary. Now, Caroline Leavitt is the youngest person to have ever served in that role. She's only 28 years old. She was 27 when she took the job last year when Donald Trump began his second term. And she has been a very strong voice in the Make America Great Again movement. She said that will continue. She said she will continue to be a vocal advocate for MAGA.
Here's the thing that makes this story way bigger than just one person leaving a job. Trump didn't just thank her and send her off into the sunset. He says she's going to become one of his top outside advisors and influential voice in the Republican Party. Think about what that actually means for a second. This isn't goodbye. This is a promotion dressed up as a resignation. She's not disappearing from politics. She's stepping out from behind the podium and stepping into something with way more freedom and honestly way more power. And the timing is everything here. This isn't happening in some quiet news week in January. This is happening as the entire Republican Party is gearing up for the midterms. The midterms. The elections that decide whether Trump keeps control of Congress or whether the whole second term turns into 2 years of gridlock and investigations. You don't reshuffle your top communications person a few months before the most important election cycle of the term unless there's a strategy behind it.
President Trump saying that White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt will be leaving her role at the end of the month so she can spend more time with her family. He announced the news on social media just a short time ago. Joining us now is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. Monica, appreciate you jumping on with us to break this news. What else did the president say?
Yeah, this is a surprising announcement, Laura, certainly because Caroline Leavitt is the president's top spokesperson. She is, of course, the most public-facing person for the White House after the president in terms of trying to deliver and convey his message. And she is someone who really has been with him for years, was on the campaign trail with him, certainly leading up to the 2024 election. But she writes now in a post on her own social media explaining why she has made this difficult decision and saying that it has been an absolute honor and adventure of a lifetime.
Nobody makes a move like this by accident, especially not this White House. So let's break down why Leavitt is really leaving and whether the family explanation holds up under scrutiny. Let's examine what her new role as an outside advisor actually means for how this administration fights the midterm battle. Let's look at who might replace her and why that person is about to inherit one of the hardest jobs in Washington. And let's figure out what this whole shakeup tells us about how Trump is preparing for a fight that could define the rest of his term. This is wild. And by the end of this breakdown, you're going to understand exactly what's happening behind the curtain, not just the headline version everybody else is giving you. Before we even get into the details, I want you to think about something. How many press secretaries can you actually name off the top of your head? Most people can't name a single one from any administration going back decades. It's a job that usually blends into the background of political memory, a face that shows up on cable news for a couple years and then fades. Leavitt broke that pattern completely. She became a genuine political figure in her own right, not just a mouthpiece standing at a podium reading talking points. And that's exactly why this exit hits different than a normal staff shuffle. This is one of the most recognizable people in the entire administration choosing to walk away from the spotlight job. Or at least that's how it looks on the surface. Let's start with the official story, because you need to hear it before we start pulling it apart. Leavitt herself put out a statement, and in it, she said she couldn't be the kind of mom her 2 young kids deserve, while also giving the press secretary job the constant time, energy, and attention it demands. And look, that's a real thing. That job is brutal. You're up before sunrise prepping for briefings. You're getting hammered by reporters for an hour straight. You're managing a message that has to stay consistent across an entire administration. And then you're doing it again the next day and the next day and the next day. There is no slow season in that job. There is no, let me take a breather this week. It just does not stop. So on the surface, yeah, this tracks. Anybody who's ever tried to balance a demanding career with young kids knows exactly what she's talking about. That's not some made-up excuse. That's real life for a lot of parents. And we shouldn't just assume she's lying about that. But here's where it gets more complicated. And this is the part most people are going to miss because they're only reading the headline and not thinking about the bigger picture. Trump didn't just accept her resignation and move on. He specifically said he totally understands and respects her decision. But then in that same breath, he elevated her. He didn't demote her. He didn't push her out quietly. He built her a new title: top outside advisor, influential Republican voice heading into the midterms. That's not how you talk about someone who's just tired and wants to go be a mom for a while. That's how you talk about someone you are repositioning for a bigger job. And that's the tension in this story that most coverage is glossing right over. Is this actually about family, or is this about strategy? And honestly, it's probably both. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. And that's exactly what makes this story so interesting, instead of just another cookie-cutter political exit. Think about what the press secretary job actually is. You are legally, functionally, constitutionally tied to defending the administration from inside the White House walls. Every word you say gets scrutinized as an official government position. You can't go on partisan shows and rip into the other side the way a campaign strategist can. You can't raise money. You can't openly organize midterm strategy the way an outside political operative can. The press secretary job, as visible as it is actually kind of a cage in terms of political freedom. You're the face of the administration, sure, but you're also boxed in by the rules of that office. Now flip that. Move Leavitt outside the White House. Suddenly, she's not bound by those same constraints. She can go on every conservative media outlet in the country and hammer the Democrats without worrying about violating norms around official government communication. She can help build midterm messaging strategy without the Hatch Act concerns that come with being a government employee. She can raise her profile as a rising Republican star, instead of being seen as just the person who stands at the podium and takes questions. This is wild when you actually sit with it, because on paper, it looks like she's stepping down. But in practice, it might be one of the smartest political moves in this entire administration's communication strategy, heading into the most important election of the term. And let's talk about who she actually was in that role, because this matters for understanding why her exit is such a big vacancy to fill. She was the youngest press secretary in American history. Think about that for a second. She walked into one of the most high-pressure, most scrutinized jobs in the entire federal government. And she did it younger than almost anybody who's ever held that position. Whatever you think about her politics, whatever side of the aisle you're on, that's not nothing. She became, in a very short amount of time, one of the most recognizable faces of this entire administration. Millions of people who don't follow politics closely still know exactly who she is because she was on their TV screen defending the White House almost every single day. So when someone with that level of visibility, that level of built-in trust with the base steps away from the podium, that's not a small transition. That's a communications earthquake inside the West Wing. And here's the part that should make you sit up. No successor has been publicly named yet. None. As of right now, we don't know who's walking into that podium next month. And with the midterms looming, with every single press conference between now and Election Day being a potential viral moment either helping or hurting the Republican Party, they're going into this transition without a name locked in. That's either a sign that they're being extremely careful about who they pick, or it's a sign that this move happened faster than expected and they're scrambling a little behind the scenes. Either way, this is a story that's just getting started, not one that's wrapping up neatly with her resignation letter. Let's talk about the history here for a second, because this actually helps explain why this exit feels so different. Press secretaries almost never leave on their own terms in the middle of a term unless something's wrong. Usually, you see them get burned out after a scandal, pushed out after a bad news cycle, or quietly move to a different job after losing the president's confidence. That's the normal pattern going back through multiple administrations on both sides of the aisle. What almost never happens is a press secretary leaving on good terms with the president, publicly praising them, and immediately getting handed a bigger informal role. That's the piece that should stand out to you. This isn't following the typical playbook of a staffer getting quietly shuffled out the door. This is a completely different kind of exit. And that difference matters. Now let's talk about what outside advisor actually tends to mean in practice, because it's a vague sounding title, but it usually translates into something very specific. Outside advisors show up on television constantly. They write op-eds. They headline rallies and events. They become surrogates who can say things far more aggressively than someone bound by official White House communication rules ever could. So, and let's be honest here, expect to see Leavitt everywhere over the next few months. Cable news hits, podcast appearances, campaign trail stops in competitive districts where Republicans are trying to hold on to seats. That's what this role becomes in practice, even if the announcement made it sound like a quiet step back from the spotlight. And here's another angle almost nobody's talking about: the money. Government employees, including press secretaries, are restricted by federal ethics rules from directly raising campaign funds or coordinating certain political activities while serving in an official capacity. Once you're an outside advisor, a lot of those restrictions disappear. She can headline fundraisers. She can help build the kind of grassroots, small dollar donor machine that modern campaigns depend on. You don't think that's part of the calculation here? A young, telegenic, combative communicator who already has a built-in national following, suddenly free to raise money and mobilize voters without the legal guardrails of a government job. That's an incredibly valuable asset heading into a midterm cycle, where every single House and Senate seat is going to be fought over inch by inch. There's also the question of what this means for how the administration talks to the public between now and the election. A brand new press secretary means a brand new voice, a new rhythm, a new set of instincts for handling hostile questions in real time. That's a risk. New press secretaries almost always have a rocky first few weeks. They misspeak. They get caught off guard by a gotcha question. They haven't built the same rapport with the reporters in that room yet. And the White House is choosing to take on that risk right in the middle of election season, not after it. That tells you something about how confident or maybe how urgent this decision really was. They didn't wait until after the midterms to make this move. They're making it now, mid-fight, which suggests the political upside of freeing Leavitt up outweighs the short-term risk of breaking in someone new at the podium. Think about the list of names that are probably being floated around inside the West Wing right now. There's always a deputy press secretary or two who's been standing next to the podium, fielding some of the questions, learning the rhythm of that room. There's often a loyalist from the campaign world who proved themselves during the last election cycle and is ready for a bigger platform. And there's sometimes a wild card pick. Somebody from conservative media, somebody with a built-in following already, brought in specifically because they know how to handle a hostile question without flinching on live television. Whoever gets tapped for this job is stepping into an incredibly high-pressure spotlight, and they're doing it with almost no runway before the midterms really heat up. This pick isn't just about finding somebody competent, it's about finding somebody who can match the energy and confidence Leavitt brought to that podium. Because dropping an energy at exactly the wrong moment could hurt Republican messaging at the worst possible time. The optics of who they choose next matters a lot. If they pick someone with a similar profile to Leavitt, young, sharp, aggressive on camera, that signals they want to keep the same combative style going into the midterms. But if they pick someone older, more traditional, more buttoned up, that could signal a shift in strategy. Maybe trying to project more stability heading into an election where they need to hold on to swing voters, not just fire up the base. So this pick isn't just a staffing decision. It's a messaging decision. It tells voters, reporters, and honestly the whole country what kind of fight this White House wants to have for the next few months. So let's break this whole thing down into the pieces that actually matter. Because there's a lot going on here, and I don't want you walking away confused about what's real and what's just noise. The official reason is family. 2 young kids, a brutal, all-consuming job. That part is legitimate on its face. And honestly, We should give people credit when they make decisions to prioritize their families, no matter what side of the political aisle they're on. This is a real, human, relatable reason, and dismissing it completely would be unfair. Millions of working parents watching this story are going to relate to that struggle instantly, whether they follow politics closely or not. And that relatability is exactly why this reasoning lands so easily with the public. But the political reason is running right alongside that family reason. Trump specifically built her a new role: top outside advisor, influential Republican voice. That's not retirement language, that's promotion language. So let's break it down simply. She's not leaving politics, she's changing lanes. She's going from a job that legally restricts her political activity to a role that gives her way more freedom to actually fight for Republicans heading into the midterms. This is a strategic repositioning disguised at least partly as a personal decision. And again, those two things can both be true at the same time. Real life is rarely just one clean motive. The vacancy itself and why it matters so much right now can't be overstated. This isn't just any communications job opening up. This is happening months before the midterm elections, during a period where every single word out of that podium is going to get dissected, clipped, and shared across every platform in the country. Whoever steps into that role has to defend the administration's entire agenda in real time against a press corps that is not going to go easy on them just because they're new. This is one of the hardest jobs to walk into cold. And the fact that no successor has been named yet tells you this decision is either still being finalized carefully or it caught some people in the West Wing off guard. This vacancy is a pressure point, and how they fill it says a lot about how confident this administration actually feels heading into election season. The bigger picture here is what ties the whole story together. This tells you something real about how Trump is thinking about the midterms. He's not just filling seats randomly. He's moving one of his most trusted, most visible communicators out into a role with more freedom to fight at the exact moment the political battle is heating up. That's not a retreat. That's a repositioning of resources toward the fight that's coming. And if you're on the other side of the aisle watching Democrats prepare their own midterm strategy, this should be a signal. The other team just freed up one of their sharpest players to go on offense. Who benefits here? Trump gets a loyal, high-profile ally who can now hit the campaign trail and media circuit without government restrictions holding her back. The Republican Party gets a young, media-savvy voice who already has name recognition with millions of voters heading into a cycle where every seat matters. And Leavitt herself, she gets to step back from the most grueling schedule in American politics without actually stepping away from the influence she's built. Everybody in that equation walks away with something. And that's exactly why this story isn't as simple as press secretary quits for family. It's a three-dimensional move, and most of the coverage out there is only looking at it from one angle. What comes next? We wait to see who takes over that podium. We watch to see how visible Leavitt becomes on the campaign trail and in conservative media over the coming weeks. And we watch to see whether other West Wing communications staff start shifting roles too, because moves like this one rarely happen in isolation. This might just be the first domino in a much bigger reshuffle as this administration gears up for the fight of its life in the midterms. Let's also talk about what this means for how regular people, folks who don't follow every twist and turn of Washington politics, are going to experience this shift. For a lot of Americans, the press secretary is the closest thing they get to a daily face of the presidency outside of Trump himself. It's the person who shows up on the nightly news clip, who gets quoted in the headlines, who becomes the shorthand for what the White House said today. When that face changes, it actually changes how the public perceives the administration's tone. Even if the policies underneath stay exactly the same, a new press secretary with a different style, a different tone, a different way of handling tough questions can shift public perception in ways that go way beyond just one person's job title. This single personnel change could end up shaping how millions of people feel about this administration's messaging over the next several months without a single policy actually changing. And let's not forget the other side of this story either, how Democrats are going to respond to this move. You can bet the Democratic strategists are already watching this closely, trying to figure out whether Leavitt stepping into a more freewheeling advisor role makes her a bigger threat on the campaign trail, or whether it actually takes her out of the daily news cycle and makes her slightly less visible in the short term. Politics is always a game of countermoves, and every strategic decision on one side gets analyzed and countered by the other. Somewhere in a strategy meeting right now, there are people on the other side of the aisle building talking points around exactly this transition, trying to figure out how to use it against Republicans heading into November. Let's break it down one more time, nice and simple, before we wrap this up. Leavitt is leaving the podium, but she is not leaving politics. Trump is repositioning one of his most trusted communicators into a role with more freedom to fight for Republicans heading into the midterms. The vacancy she leaves behind is one of the most high-pressure jobs in the entire federal government, and whoever fills it is walking straight into election season, with almost no room for error. And this whole shakeup tells you that this administration is not playing it safe right now. They are actively repositioning their best assets for the fight that's coming months before a single vote gets cast. Keep your eyes open, because this story is not over. It's just getting started. And when that new press secretary steps up to that podium for the first time, you already know the entire political world is going to be watching, analyzing, and reacting in real time. The midterms are coming, the stakes are massive, and every single move from here on out matters more than ever.